we're now going to go to a section. There's menopause and the working environment. We're going to hear from 3 people, Andrew, Sue and Jenny, about their lived experience of living with the menopause. And then we're going to, afterwards, Jayne Woodman will be delivering a presentation. As you can see from the slide, she's a workplace menopause educator, speaker, university lecturer, and midlife career coach. And she is established the menopause team in 2019 to keep driving forward this agenda. So thank you very much for all those who agreed to share their personal experiences, and over to you.
Hi, my name's Andrew, and I'm here to discuss my experience with the male menopause. I am now 52 years old. But when I was 49, at the end of August 2018 to the beginning of November, a total of 55 days, I was off with depression. Diagnosed with depression was really strange to me because I'm normally an upbeat guy. But I also had a relapse then the following year from the 18th of February to the 22nd of April. Another 53 days off with depression. I didn't know what was happening to me, and I must admit it was a scary, lonely place. I didn't want to speak to anybody. I locked myself in my bedroom, but I always wanted my wife to come and see me and speak to me. But as soon as she came into the room, I pushed her away. She was strong through those days, even though treading on eggshells. My children were also very worried, so she was supporting them, because I just burst into tears sometimes. If I managed to get out of my room and come downstairs, they would see this. My face, my body, everything just felt so bad, and I didn't know this was even possible to happen to me. I have suffered a bit with mental illness, but nothing like this. It was horrific. I was scared. The one thing I will say is it didn't push me over the edge. Probably because of the support of my wife, and we're still happily married. Well, we're happily now. At the time, it probably wasn't so happy for her or for me. It was only when I started speaking to Jayne Woodman, a colleague of mine, as we were going to set up a series of menopause awareness sessions for women and for men, but most of the men haven't really joined in yet. But before we started talking about the female menopause, I wanted to look and find out about this, so I knew a bit myself. I searched on the NHS website A to Z, so I went M for menopause. There wasn't one for female menopause, but there was one that stood out, the male menopause. I thought, what's that? I didn't even know anything about it. So I thought, I'll have a look at this. And I looked at the bullet points on there, and there were so many that I was going through, or had been through, I should say. At the top of the list was depression, which I'd been diagnosed with twice. I also had a loss of sex drive, mood swings and irritability, a loss of muscle mass, and reduced ability to exercise. In fact, when I went to one of my favourite places, because it still happens now, I fell off a boat, luckily onto land, on Skomer Island, because my legs just didn't work. They went to step and didn't step properly. I laughed about it where my wife was a bit panicky, but I think I had to laugh at that point. I have got the man boobs, which are quite impressive. I had a general lack of enthusiasm. There was no energy in me. I had difficulty sleeping. I was tired all the time. Poor concentration and short-term memory. I even have that now, the fuzzy memory, where I could be talking about something and mid-sentence forget what I'm talking about. Or if I'm interrupted, don't ask me what I was talking about, because I just can't remember. My lifestyle wasn't great either. I had a poor diet, not eating much, eating wrong things, drinking too much alcohol, and pretty down low and self-esteem. This interfered with my everyday life. I was not happy, which is unusual for me because, like I said, I'm normally a happy, upbeat person. But I didn't know at the time the underlying cause to be able to resolve it. This is obviously a problem, but we've got through it thanks to my wife and thanks to my children who have always been there for me. I think that you need a strong person with you. Otherwise, it could have led to something like a relationship breakdown, a divorce. I don't know. But originally, I thought it may have been a midlife crisis that men do go through, but I didn't go buying a motorbike and riding off into the sunset. I just, like I said, locked myself in the room, and it's only with my family, my work colleagues, that I managed to get through this, and I'm so grateful for all their support.
My name's Sue Marie Jones, and I'm a social worker, and I am now 50 years of age. And I want to talk a little bit about the menopause. So when I was around about 44, I was very much into fitness and training, and really, exercising a great deal, probably daily, doing lots of really, really physical stuff. And I started to get a lot of injuries quite quickly. And around about that time, my periods had started to vary, so they weren't really consistent anymore. So I never really knew if I was going to have a period or not. So I kind of guessed that potentially I could be starting with a menopause. And generally, I didn't know very much about the menopause, only that what I've just said, your period stopped. It can happen any time between 40s up to 50. And it kind of made you fat, it's sort of middle-age spread sort of thing. And like, you basically have a lot of sweats, I guess, and, I'd worked with other people in the past, and that's what I always kind of remembered about the menopause. And so lots of things were happening at that time. I was getting a lot of headaches, lack of sleep. I was probably surviving on about 3 to 4 hours sleep a night, every night, for years, in fact, but, predominantly it started around then. And then I started to have the usual. So I was starting to have things like hot sweats. And so I went back to the doctors and inquired about treatment for menopause. And I was told, because I had a family history, so my mum had breast cancer and my grandmother, she'd had breast cancer, that they wouldn't even consider treating me with HRT. So, a general menopause treatment. They would look at things like antidepressants, which would help with the hot sweats and help with the anxiety. So I went away with, I think it was 5 or 10 milligrams of citalopram at the time. I can't remember which. And then, of course, consequently, it was affecting my work. So, as a social worker, I should really be on the ball with things and organised. And actually, I was not able to be organised. I was losing my train of thought. I was having hot sweats when I was doing assessments and when I was out, but then also that brain fog. I'd wake up in the morning, felt like a big black cloud was over my head. Sometimes I didn't even want to get out of bed. Started to suffer with migraines. I went back to the doctors. I explained a lot of my symptoms, and she upped my antidepressants to 20 milligrams and said, we can't give you HRT. So we carried on in that vein, sort of thing. I think it all kind of came to a head when I was in a team meeting one day, and we used to do well-being at the beginning of the meeting, and the manager sort of went around and asked how everybody was, and I was having a particularly bad day, and I just burst out crying on camera in front of all of my colleagues because I wasn't coping at all. I wasn't doing my work. Wasn't functioning really in my job. Sometimes hours would go past in work and I hadn't actually done anything. I'd just be staring at the computer, looking at my emails maybe, but not really doing my work, not doing my job as I should have been doing it. So my manager was very good and kind of said to me, go and get some help. Go and get some help. I don't know that you should be in work. You've got to make that decision, but go and get some help and do a bit of research. And from that phone call, I sort of sat down and had a word with my husband, who was really supportive, I have to say, and started doing some research. I also spoke to somebody on Facebook, an old colleague who's friend as well, who said, have you looked at the Louise Newson menopause information doctor? She's known as the menopause doctor. So I did a little bit of research there and got her Balance app and had a proper look about signs and symptoms. And my gosh, I think out of, I don't know, I think it was 34 or something symptoms. I'd probably had about 32 of those symptoms at one point or another through this journey, and was still having them. And I started to record and make a diary. I was logging what I was doing. And one night I recorded, I think it was 25 sweats in a 12-hour period, something like that, or 24-hour. I can't remember, but it was a lot of sweats. And with sweats, a full-blown panic attack and anxiety. My chest, I had pains in my chest and everything. And so kind of, I got to the stage where enough was enough. So there's a thing on the app, lots of information, and one of the bits of information was about connection to breast cancer and the use of HRT, which I read, and then I wrote pretty much a 6-page dossier to my GP, kind of explaining all my symptoms that I could remember. So I was basically, putting my arms out, saying, please help me, give me the right medication to treat my condition. And I then went through a process of reducing these antidepressants that I was on, because you can't just come off antidepressants, myself, and introducing some medication that came from the doctor. She thanked me actually for the letter that I'd done, and said how helpful it was in facilitating her ability to give me the right treatment, because they don't have enough time, and they also don't have enough education around menopause, which was quite eye-opening, really. I'm not really sure exactly what would have helped at the time, because I wasn't really connecting the dots myself. But I think in workplace, perhaps, more raised awareness, open discussion. I mean, we do talk about things like breast cancer. Everybody knows, the signs, the symptoms. It's everywhere, isn't it? Always check yourself that. Maybe there should be something similar in terms of menopause. It's a good job I had a good manager, so I would say training for managers and things, because she identified that I was struggling. And she was the one who really pushed me to getting back in touch with the GP. If that what you're going through, or you start to experience anything, I would say go and have a test, see where you're at, see if you are peripausal or, getting, into the menopause. Don't be fobbed off. So if you're not happy with the information you get from your GP, don't allow, or the nurse, don't allow them just to give you something and say, oh, this will help. If you don't feel it will, do your own research, I would say. Keep a diary, kind of log your symptoms. I still keep a diary now. Because I'm not completely, I'm still in the menopause, I'm having treatment. I still have really bad days. I still have days where I can't find words and I stutter over things, like I probably have done doing this recording. But, I would say that write to your GP. I think that helped. I think writing to the GP and really, I poured my heart out on them 6 pages. I absolutely told her exactly what I'd been feeling, what I was going through. And I actually used the Balance app, who would give you the signs and symptoms. I actually used that as kind of a checklist for me to explain to the GP what I was going through. And I think that kind of helped a lot, and it helped the GP understand what I was going through. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'd like to talk to you about my experience of the menopause. So certainly before I started having symptoms, I knew that the menopause could cause you hot flushes and also some weight gain, but I didn't appreciate all of the symptoms that were possible. And I certainly didn't know that you could start those symptoms during the perimenopause process. So in terms of the symptoms that I experienced, I certainly had hot flushes, night sweats, low mood, difficulty in concentrating, and a fog brain. So all of these added up together to make quite a big difference to my work environment, as tasks that I would previously have found no difficulty in would become more difficult, certainly those that involved complex thinking processes. And in terms of home life, I had a very understanding partner through this process, but it was certainly work that was the environment where I noticed most of the symptoms. And so in terms of actual understanding and making a difference to this whole process, I would have really liked that there was some kind of check-in by the medical establishment with women during their 40s, so that they had the education and training in and understanding of the symptoms that you could get, and also the options that you could take to actually alleviate these symptoms, including understanding HRT. That would have really made the difference to me. And in the absence of that, I had to do a lot of research myself when I started having symptoms, once I'd appreciated that they may be menopause related. And once I'd done a lot of research using applications such as the Balance Menopause app to research articles, to monitor my symptoms, I then progressed to a stage where I was happy to look at and then happy with the risks associated with HRT, for example, because of the fact that I knew that it was going to make a difference. Because as the estrogen level drops off, there are other associated risks like osteoporosis and heart health that I needed to take care of. But I had to instigate a lot of this myself, whereas it would be useful if the medical establishment puts into the diary of all women when they go through their 40s a time when these are reviewed formally and they get the information that they need. And work could help as well in terms of providing forums for discussing these related symptoms and how do we manage those. I certainly felt supported in my workplace whilst I was going through symptoms, which meant it took a little bit more time with some complex tasks in order to achieve them. But my advice to all women would be to take care of your health yourself and make time to get an appreciation of all of the symptoms that you could go through, and then look at the different options that you have and see whether something like HRT could be useful to you. I certainly thought it was a lifesaver for me in managing my symptoms.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. It's a pleasure to have listened to the people who spoke of their own experiences. Today, I'm going to mainly focus on an age-friendly working environment in the context of women. However, Andrew spoke at the beginning about his experiences of midlife as a man. And we try and address those. Each month we try and address the issues around midlife, men and women, as part of Academy Wales and their training sessions. So please look us up and join us. So an age-friendly working environment, as I said, mainly from the perspective today of women, but I absolutely wouldn't want to discount men. So what does it look like? Well, it looks imperfect. I've put the IM in brackets because actually society wants us to be Instagram perfect all of the time. And so when we get into the workplace, this is how we feel we need to present ourselves. But actually, that's not possible. And we need to accept that imperfection. And that we are doing our best. So currently in the UK, women make up over just half of the population. And as Martin said, we are 13 million menopausal women in the UK, but 4.5 million working. So we're the fastest growing demographic in the UK workforce. But Martin also highlighted that the most common reason for leaving the workforce is around health. So we really need to address the issues that the menopause presents in order that women can work at an optimum level. So 2022, 1 in 6 of us at work will be 50 plus. So you could hear from the previous speakers that there's a lack of understanding for individuals and there's a lack of understanding in the workplace. So in terms of what the menopause actually is, then you might have in your family heard whispers of the change. And that's what it is. It's a change in hormone levels. But we don't even go that far. We just call it the change. We don't talk about these hormone levels. And maybe that's something that you could consider. When did you last talk about this subject within your family? So when did you talk to your mum about it, or your daughter, or your grandmother, or your aunt? We don't have a history of talking about this subject. So back to the hormones. So it's principally about estrogen. We start to have great fluctuations in our estrogen around perimenopause time, but then it tails off. Now, estrogen attaches itself to cells all over our bodies. So menopause is going to happen to us all over our bodies. We also have issues with progesterone fluctuations, and we lose up to 50% of our testosterone. This is a significant issue because currently for women in the UK, it's very difficult to get testosterone. And those people that are lucky enough to get it have to get it privately, so they have to pay for it. Carolyn Harris is speaking later, and this is part of her menopause revolution in order to get testosterone readily available for women. So we need to do more research on how these hormones play out in our bodies, because about 80% of women experience some kind of notable effect because of these changes in hormone levels. So we need to become much more understanding about what can happen with the fluctuations, and particularly in the case of estrogen, the really tailing off of this very important hormone. So these are some of the symptoms that you might experience because of the lack of hormones, the tailing off of hormones, and the fluctuation in the hormones. So there are some that I'll pick out. For example, you might have had some electric shocks in your life. If you're a child of the 70s and you wore too much nylon, then you will be familiar with electric shocks. Through perimenopause and into menopause and beyond, we seem to get more of these electric shocks. Traditionally, you might have touched escalators and got an electric shock, or a car door on a cold day. I was giving one of these presentations recently, and a lady said that she'd had an electrician come to the house because she was having so many electric shocks that she thought there was something wrong with her household electrics. And this is a point to note. Because we don't necessarily understand the symptoms of the menopause, we go looking for answers in places that we're absolutely not going to find them. So again, as much as it is important to understand hormones, it's also important to understand the symptoms of the menopause. So what you see in front of you here are about 34 symptoms. Some people would say there are as many as 66 symptoms. Dental health issues are also significant. So you might be experiencing problems in midlife, but your dentist is unlikely to link your dental health problems to menopause issues and hormone issues. So again, really important to start to get to understand how these can play out in your life. So if we think about when do these symptoms start? then for most women, it's around the age 45 to 55. But again, because we're unaware of what the symptoms might be, then we just think that perhaps we've got early onset dementia or we're overloaded. We don't necessarily understand that how we're feeling is a result of the menopause, and particularly perimenopause. Now, some people experience symptoms much earlier. So around 1 in every 100 women will experience symptoms before the age of 40. And then around 1 in 20 women will perhaps experience symptoms between the ages of, say, 41 and 44. So if you do go to your GP and you present some of the symptoms that you've been experiencing and they tell you that you're too young, then you need to challenge that. This is not just the domain of women in midlife. Some trans men, intersex, non-binary people who've had surgical interventions, others who are on different hormonal journeys, they will all experience menopause. So the youngest person that I've met that was transitioning from female to male, they were 17 years old and they were experiencing symptoms of menopause. The youngest person I've met who had an early menopause, female, she had started menopausal symptoms when she was 14. I met her when she was 27, and she'd had a really difficult time being taken seriously by GPs and getting the medication that she needed. So don't think that it's just the experience of women in midlife. So there are really 3 awareness raising challenges. Women themselves, so us, as I said, we don't have a history of talking about this in our families. In terms of the generations, it's not information that's passed through. We don't talk to our children about it. Sometimes we don't even talk to our partners about it. But then organisations, if we're thinking of working well, we already understand that there's 4.5 million menopausal women at work. We're the fastest growing demographic. There's a lack of awareness for organisations as well, and that could make a real difference to the amount of women that stay at work. The other issue is the UK medical profession. There's a lack of awareness here as well. So if we think of the medical profession, then there's a report, 2020 British Medical Association report, and it's called the Challenging the Culture on Menopause for Working Doctors. Now, a lot of female doctors leave the profession in midlife because they can't cope with the complexities of the job. And that potentially is a result of menopause. Now, this is principally because as well, the lack of education whilst doctors are qualifying. So 41% of universities currently offer no mandatory training. Those universities that do offer training, sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours, but it's not really enough to deal with the complex nature of the menopause. So this is where it comes back to us. And both of the speakers that were before me, Jenny and Sue Marie, they indicated that we need to do our own research in this area so that then we are aware and we can take information to our GP with us. There are only 143 accredited menopause specialists in the UK. So again, you have the right to be referred to a specialist, but there are potentially going to be waiting lists. So we've got 3 areas that we need to address. That's ourselves, that's talking about it within our family. Also that we do some research, organisations, so that we can work well, need to have some understanding, but also then GPs, they need to play their part. So in terms of facts, 45% of Welsh women find their symptoms difficult to deal with. Now, this reference is from the Fair Treatment of the Women of Wales, and that's a great website to go to. That deals with some of the health issues that Welsh women might experience, and they talk about menopause. So that's a website that's got evidence-based research, and that might help you understand what's happening for a lot of women. So The Guardian published an article in January which talked about perhaps more than 1 million women leaving work this year due to lack of support for the menopause. So we can address these issues. We can change this through awareness from ourselves, awareness for workplaces and GPs. We can bring these figures right down. Some women might wish to leave work. They might have worked somewhere for 20 years and perhaps had enough and want to go and do something different. But if you want to stay in your job but feel unable, then you do deserve support. So Dot Davis, she put a piece out for ITV saying that 60% of Welsh women said symptoms negatively affect their work. If you do a Google search, you can find this work that Dot Davis did. But again, really high figures, unnecessary. Both of the people that spoke before me referred to Dr. Louise Newson. So Dr. Louise Newson is the foremost menopause specialist in the UK. Absolutely somebody to engage with. So she's got a website called Balance. She's got an app called Balance that you could download onto your phone. Lots of great evidence-based material to be found there. But if you think of this figure, 25% having severe symptoms, you know, this is so debilitating and so then impactful for women that we can change this if we address these 3 areas. And Dot Davis would say that in Wales alone, 30% of women consider leaving their jobs. Generally in the UK, 1 in 10 actually leave. And even those women that are staying don't seek the promotions that they deserve, which is tragic because there are solutions out there. This need not be happening. So what could we do to achieve an age-friendly working environment for women? Well, generally, we've all got a part to play in this. So we can talk about the menopause. I've put in brackets here Renee Brown. Maybe you're aware of Renee Brown. She's an American researcher and she works, I think, at Houston University. She's got a great TED talk, great videos on YouTube. But principally, her research is about vulnerability. So we tend perhaps not to talk about the menopause because it makes us feel vulnerable and it makes us feel perhaps embarrassed. But her research would say that if you can talk about these things, other people will see it as a strength. And I'm sure, actually, that when you watched Andrew talk, Sue Marie and Jenny, you all thought that they were strong for doing that. So think about that yourself and then think about whether the menopause really should be something that you're discussing. We should also be finding out more, being proactive. So not waiting till midlife, understanding the menopause from an early age. It's on the curriculum now in schools in England and in Wales. So on that basis, young people will start to get a baseline knowledge. But it's really important to develop that knowledge. And certainly don't see it as a gender issue. Women don't live or work in isolation. So it's important to engage men too. And certainly establish where you can get help and support so that when you need it, you know where you can go. And this isn't about necessarily giving advice to others, but this can also be about signposting others in terms of where they can get help and support. So if we're thinking about them becoming a menopause-friendly employer, this is back to what I started with at the beginning, this acceptance of imperfection. But this isn't about female imperfection. We're all imperfect. It's impossible to be perfect. And the Instagram world would like us to think otherwise, but the reality is somewhat different. So we have all got, in some way or other, leaky bodies. And I think as organisations, we need to be more accepting of this. We also need to understand that everyone's menopause is unique. So if you have experience of the menopause, or you know somebody who's experienced the menopause, don't make assumptions that that's going to play out in the lives of then people that you work with. It can be very different. So it is about listening and supporting the individual needs of employees. This is how you can become a menopause-friendly employer. Engage in awareness. So the workplace culture. Create conditions for managers to feel comfortable about talking around the menopause. So that's to do with awareness raising and training. Creating policies and frameworks so that managers and team leaders are aware of what is required. And then workplace environments, locations that can better alleviate the symptoms. You know, often a lot of us work in open plan offices. That can be a nightmare for menopausal women. Strip lighting, the kind of that strip lighting that you see in offices. I've experienced that myself, where I just have to continually switch the lights off, which wasn't great for other colleagues. So find out about maybe how you can support people. Maybe you've got a smaller office where people can go if they need to be doing more complex, thought-provoking work. Maybe you have differentiated start times. Maybe you issue more uniform or different uniform. But again, it will be unique to your organisation.